In this lesson, let's look at two things that can really help you do some creative work in Final Cut Pro. I'm talking about opacity on a clip and something called blending modes. I work in a program called Adobe Photoshop. I have been for about 160 years. I love that program. When I'm teaching that program, I can spend with my students days talking about blending modes. I love blending modes. Now, opacity is a pretty easy concept to figure out. Blending modes, once you get into them, though, can be very creative. Now, let's do this. Go into secondary media. You don't have anything down here in your lab. Open it up by expanding it and go into bikes and bring down, number one, bring down the kitties. Ah, yeah, the kitties. Bring down dirt bike and put it on top right about here. Now, it's much longer, but it's a very slow motion kind of thing, too. So let's do this. Select it, press Command R, because that's a shortcut to getting into your retiming options, and let's double the speed and see what that does for us. Close, but no cigar. So let's do this. Let's grab right here and let's force it to retime based on the length of the two clips. I do want them to be together. We do have a classic B-roll right now, but I want you to remember the backstory that I made up for this. These kids grew up to be these kids. And I want to figure out a way to somehow kind of blend the two images together. Like these guys right here become the ghosts of the future. In blending modes and opacity might not be a bad way to do that. So let's come over here and select this clip. Let's go into our inspector. Now in our inspector, if you go all the way down to the bottom, you have compositing options. One down here, most people could figure that one out, opacity. So if I come over and drag that down this way, I can start getting them to come through. Opacity is an easy one to understand. Blending modes are where the fun starts. There are a lot of them. We could spend literally hours and hours talking about what they do. The best way to work is to experiment to find the one that works best for you. Because based on the colors and everything else between the two that you're trying to blend together, you might use a different one the next day and achieve a better result using two different clips. Just depends. An easy one to remember is multiply. Multiply multiplies the values of the colors in this clip with the values and the colors of the one below it. And the final event will always be darker. So if we click multiply, oh, we've got that. If I press the space bar to run it, interesting but too dark. One we might try is called overlay. Overlay the bikers on top of these guys, but leave the guys there. And if we try that one, that's interesting, but I want to try the opposite of multiply. Now, the opposite of multiply is screen, and that in most cases will always lighten. Now, if we come back over here again and start playing, that's actually not too bad, but they're still too intense. So let's add a combination of opacity. Now, we can do this while we're watching it. There we go. Maybe something like that. I'm not saying this is always going to work, putting two videos together, but sometimes you can do some very creative things. Now, we're not done. It starts too fast. It's just like boom, and they're there. Let's put a transition here. So let's go into our transitions, and I'm going to do a cross dissolve. Put it on the front end, and let's stretch that out just a little bit more. Let's close this for now. Let's come over to here. Kind of interesting, but one more thing. This is supposed to be an old video of kids who have grown up. So let's do this. Let's select this one. Let's come into our effects and do something like aged film. Drag it on there. Let's come over here so we can see it. Let's go back into our inspector. And let's give it some scratches, a little bit of dust, some hair. And let's change the brightness so it flickers a little bit like old film. Okay, let's come back over here. Let me close this out again so we see more. And try that one more time. That's kind of interesting. Blending modes and opacity are two features that have really been improved upon in Final Cut Pro X. And it takes some experimentation. Sometimes they're not going to do what you want them to do. Sometimes they will, and when they do, they can produce some really fantastic results.